This is Rights at Risk, a podcast from the World Organization Against Torture. We explore human rights through stories from the front lines and analysis from experts.
No justice! El violador eres tú.
No human being is illegal.
I'm your host, Claire-Marie Germain.
Gunmen strapped with suicide bombs attacked restaurants, a concert hall, and a sports stadium at locations across Paris on Friday night, prompting the president to declare a national emergency.
The French government retaliated against Muslims in their homes, their businesses, and their places of worship by ordering over 4,600 raids.
Police violence, often fueled by racism and discrimination, is a growing issue worldwide. Its victims face trauma, lifetime injuries, or death. In 2015, following a series of terrorist attacks in France, the Muslims, or those perceived as Muslims, became the targets of police raids. This wave of hatred quickly spread to the world. Yasser Louati is a French human rights activist and the head of the Committee for Justice and Liberties. He tells us about institutional racism and how an entire part of the population can get oppressed and marginalized. Hello Yasser, welcome to Rights at Risk. What is the trend in terms of police violence? Is it increasing?
Well, first, thank you for inviting me. If we take a look at the past 4 or 5 years, you just have to take a look at what's happening in the US. Not a week goes by without a video on social media showing us white policemen killing black people. The same thing applies in other parts of Europe. We have seen that violence in Sweden. We have seen it in the UK. We have seen the treatment of migrants across Europe at the border between France and Italy, etc. And people tend to think, oh, well, the police are protecting us. No, madam, no, sir. The police is there to protect the political regime because these police operations, they do not fight crime. You don't fight crime with a baton or a gun. You fight crime with social programs, education, and more equality. That's how you fight crime. You do not fight so-called illegal immigration by letting people die in the Mediterranean or beating their skulls when they reach the shore. You fight that by stopping your support to dictatorships in their home countries and by stopping the plundering of their natural resources because these problems require long-term solutions. But to come today and say, oh, well, the police is at least here to protect us, it makes you extremely naive.
Could you tell us more about what Islamophobia means?
The definition of Islamophobia, the consensus around it is the attacks against people and institutions for their perceived or real adherence to the Muslim faith. Based on statistics from the Paris School of Business by Marie-Anne Valfort, if your name sounds Muslim, you are 5 times more likely of facing discrimination at work. According to the European Network Against Racism, the Forgotten Women study, if you are a Muslim woman wearing a headscarf in France, you stand a 1% chance of finding employment. And the list goes on with access to housing. People with Arabic and Muslim sounding names, it takes them twice as long to get access to proper housing. And sometimes they even have to lie or send a white person to visit the apartment or the house they wish to rent, because otherwise they would be denied access. So these are all the manifestations. At the state level, it's even more brutal. We have seen in 2015 the way the French government retaliated against Muslims in their homes, their businesses, and their places of worship by ordering over 4,600 raids. Less than 1% were actually led to investigations on terror grounds. But unfortunately, when those raids are carried with such brutality, you destroy families, you destroy communities, and we still haven't assessed the consequences on kids who saw their parents being arrested at gunpoint or their mothers being dragged off their beds in their underwear. This is how Islamophobia manifests itself, and like any other form of racism, be it anti-Semitism, be it anti-black racism, or anti-Roma racism, it always starts with words and it ends in blood.
You argue that the government targeting Muslim citizens is exactly what the terrorists would want. Why?
The government, when they launched their attacks against Muslims, first, before we even speak of the consequences and how they did exactly what terrorist groups were looking for. If you refer back to a piece called The Destruction of the Gray Zone, written by ISIS in their online magazine Dabik, it was actually shared by WikiLeaks in the aftermath of the 2015 attacks. They say it clearly that the attacks had two objectives. First, to shed blood in the West, and second, to create an atmosphere where retaliation becomes normal against Muslims and they are pushed to pick their side. Either they join the so-called caliphate or they stay with what they label the non-believers, and therefore their blood is legitimate. And the government, by attacking innocent Muslims in the aftermath of the attacks, definitely did what ISIS was expecting from them. What the government also failed to mention, what the media pundits also failed to tell the general audiences, is that terrorists made no difference between Muslims and non-Muslims. We take a look at the 2015 attacks, be it in November in the streets of Paris or in the stadium or in the streets, they went after everybody. When we take a look at the 2016 attacks on the Bastille Day celebration in Nice, the first victim that was rammed and crushed by this cargo truck was a Muslim woman wearing a headscarf, and she was the first to have been targeted.
Islamophobia is also prevalent in the media. We can hear it in this interview you gave to CNN after the 2015 attacks.
We have more now on how the Muslim communities in France are reacting to these attacks.
Yes, Yasser Louati joins us from Paris.
I never told them I'm Muslim. Who says I'm Muslim? So I never told them, hey, my name is Yasser Louati and I'm a Muslim. So from the onset, I'm already perceived as I'm one of them. Who's them? I don't know. They never told me.
Well, Yasser, if your camp is the French camp, why is it that no one within the Muslim community there in France knew what these guys were up to?
I had no right to feel shocked, but I was expected to give an explanation on how come Muslims did not warn the police about the unfolding attacks, because somehow they must have known that was going on.
I'm yet to hear, the condemnation from the Muslim community on this. But
I mean,
we'll
again, the point he's making is it's not our fault, but the fact of the matter is when these things happen, the finger of blame is pointed at the Muslim community, and so
the word responsibility comes to mind.
It just comes to mind. You can't shirk that.
They just asked me to apologize. Of course, that is something I vehemently refused to do, because I'm as much as a victim as any other French person being attacked by terrorism. I could be attacked by terrorists in the subway, at my workplace, in the supermarket, in a museum, or in a concert hall, like any other person. Unfortunately, such interviews have become the norm nowadays. And we see that with the unfolding attacks in Gaza, we see that in the UK, we see it in France, etc. And what doesn't help in the case of France, this is where France bears a historic responsibility in the rise of Islamophobia around the world, is that while France portrays herself as the country of human rights, the country of the Declaration of Human Rights and the citizen, the country that proclaims, liberté, égalité, fraternité, it is France that was first, at least in the West, to pass legislation specifically tailored to attack Muslims. And in return, many countries said, if France can do it, so can we. So we see now other countries like the UK, we see pressure groups in the US, even in Canada or elsewhere in Europe, getting their inspiration from France. And this goes beyond the Western world, because we are not the center of the world. Countries like China and India, you will see their pundits and their spokespeople say, well, if France can do it, how about us?
Why should other people care what happens to Muslims?
By allowing Islamophobia to develop, you create an enemy within. And with the creation of this enemy within, you legitimize and create a precedent to pass very repressive laws in the name of fighting that enemy within. But in the end, the whole population becomes target. We saw the example in the US with the Patriot Act. It was supposedly meant to only target, Muslims in the US. Many people felt safe until Edward Snowden came up in 2013 and revealed how the Patriot Act was used to put under surveillance the whole American population. And the same applies to the UK with the Prevent Act, and in France with the law on surveillance, the state of emergency, and now the fight against so-called radicalization.
Islamophobic policies divide societies in France and throughout the world. How can reconciliation happen?
Reconciliation happens at our own individual levels. I sincerely do not believe in these, how can I say, initiatives taken by the higher ups. It's with your neighbor, with your workmate, it's in the ballot. It's you when you seek accountability from your mayor, from your deputy. When they vote for laws targeting your neighbor, know that these laws apply to you too. And at the same time, keep in mind, regardless of our disagreements, regardless to which group or political group we belong to, we are bound to live and die together. There is no other alternative.